Good evening, all. I'm John. I'm the event director at Literati Bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We are incredibly grateful and honored to present Joe Hill and Josh Malerman tonight to read from each other's work, to talk craft, to talk about scary, as Josh has promised, and answer some of your questions. So I'm going to go over some basic Zoom stuff. Some of you are already making use of the chat. I'll probably jump in there if things stay respectful to drop some links to books to purchase in the chat. You can also ask questions for the Q&A there. You can also use the webinar's Q&A feature to ask questions. And we've had some pre-submitted questions as well. And I'll try to grab from all of those to, at the end of the talk, ask some of your questions to Josh and Joe. You can also order books. On the very page that took you to this webinar or to register for this webinar, you can scroll down and find a list of all titles by Josh and Joe that you can order from Literati Bookstore right now. Because of Michigan's shelter-in-place order, our booksellers are home, and we're not shipping books out from the store as we tried to help facilitate frontline healthcare workers. But our distributor is fulfilling those orders, and we see the proceeds. You can also pre-order Mallory, Josh's new book that comes out in July, but we just ask that you do that separately from your book purchases so that it helps the store. And then just a quick thanks. Since we opened as a bookstore 7 years ago, we've strived not to just be a bookstore, but a community space. And before all this happened, we were working on potentially hosting Joe in a beautiful venue here in Ann Arbor. And we've been lucky to host Josh for a couple truly wild, unforgettable events in our store where he scared the pants off people performing excerpts of Bird Box and Black Man Wheel. So not being able to do that sucks, but we're really grateful for the opportunity to do it virtually and to bring a community together here. So if you have the means right now, please order books, support these authors, their publishers, and independent bookstores. And thank you to Eliza, William Morrow, and to Joe and to Josh for agreeing to do this and support our bookstore. It means so much to us. And if you want to shop for other books, you can do that too. Okay, I promise, I'm done. So with that out of the way,
I like what you're doing. You're very good at this.
Thank you. Joe Hill is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the novels The Fireman, Nosferatu, Horns and Heart-Shaped Box, Strange Weather, a collection of novellas, and the prize-winning story collection 20th Century Ghosts. He's also the Eisner Award-winning writer of the 6-volume comic book series Lock and Key. Much of his work has been adapted for film and TV, including Nosferatu, Lock and Key, which you can watch on Netflix, and they've probably been binging right now, and In the Tall Grass. And Josh Malerman is a New York Times bestselling author and one of 2 singer-songwriters for the rock band The High Strung. His debut novel, Bird Box, is the inspiration for the hit Netflix film of the same name. His other novellas include Unburied Carol and Inspection. Novels, excuse me.
I almost said something. I was like, those are long, man.
Those are long, yeah. He lives in Michigan too. He's just up the road. Please virtually welcome both these authors to your living room or space of choice. Guys, take it away.
Awesome. True random fact about about Josh. My wife and I read about 6-7 books to each other a year aloud. So I'll read to her when she's putting together a puzzle. She'll read to me when I'm driving. We read Bird Box to each other aloud. That was sort of how I discovered your work.
That's unbelievable. You know,
it was a hell of a good time. It was a hell of a good time.
You know what's extra strange about that is that Alice and I also do about like 6 books a year. Like I read out loud to her while she's when she's painting or something like that. We read. I tried to make it like what is it? Phantom of the Opera. And Interview with a Vampire, Anatomy of a Murder. I'm trying to make it sort of like classics that I might not read.
Yeah.
I might not read on my own for some reason, and it's like, you know what, both of us, we need to read this one. Let's do it this way.
We've read a lot of mysteries to each other. We've read a lot of Anthony Horowitz novels. And my thing is I'll get bored sometimes when I'm reading and start to make my own stuff up. And I'll see how long I can read before she realizes I'm bullshitting her. Yeah. And I was reading her Moriarty, by Anthony Horowitz while she put together a puzzle. And I read something about a third of the way from the ending, a sentence that was just so gobsmackingly amazing. I mean, just completely, stunning. And she threw down the puzzle piece she was working on and said, "Horse shit! You show that to me right now." I'm like, I didn't make it up. It's on the page, but she wouldn't believe it until she actually saw it for herself.
I try to obviously sneak in like sex scenes and stuff when I'm reading. Yeah,
a little bit of that.
But then it's like it's so obvious, like because it's so artless, But I try though.
So we were going to start. Hi, everybody out there in Zoom land. We were going to start by reading a little fiction, and I thought I would start by reading something from Josh's new book, and then Josh could read a story from my last book. So I'm going to take it away. This is from Mallory, which is the sequel to Bird Box, which isn't out yet, right? Mallory isn't out for
July.
Okay, so here's a little quick preview from the next book. Okay, here we go. The Jane Tucker School for the Blind. Mallory stands flat against the brick wall of a classroom. The door is locked. She is alone. The lights are off. She is blindfolded. Outside, in the hall, violence has begun. She knows this sound, has heard it in nightmares, has heard it in the echoes of a fallen house full of sane people tearing one another apart as she gave birth to her son. Tom is out there in the violence right now. Mallory doesn't know where. She breathes in, she holds it, she breathes out. She reaches for the door to unlock it, to open it, to find her son and daughter among the screams, the hysteria, the frenzy. Something cracks on the other side of the door. Sounds like someone slamming their head against the hall wall. She pulls back from the doorknob. When she last saw Olympia, the 6-year-old was reading Braille books in the Tucker Library. A dozen others were there, listening to the classical music played through the school speakers by way of the record player in the office. Mallory listens for the voices of those people now. She needs to know if this violence has reached the library, reached her daughter. If it has, she will look for Tom first. She listens. Her kids have taught her a lot about listening since arriving at the Jane Tucker School for the Blind. And while Mallory will never hear the world they do, she can try. There's too much noise out there, chaos. It's impossible to discern one voice from another. She thinks of Annette, the blind woman, much older than herself, whose name she heard screamed moments ago as Mallory, hungry, walked the hall to the cafeteria. Before Mallory had time to process the nature of the scream, Annette herself came around the corner, blue bathrobe and red hair trailing like spinning sirens, knife in hand. Mallory had time to note the woman's open, unfocused eyes before closing her own. Mallory thought, she's blind. How is she mad? Then she went still. Annette passed her, breathing heavy, moving fast, and Mallory, hearing the first guttural howls from deeper in the school, stepped blind to the nearest classroom and locked its door behind her. She reaches for the knob again now. The last she saw of Tom, he was in what was once the staff lounge, pieces of a new invention at his knees. Mallory is responsible for those pieces. Only 6, Tom, the boy, invents like Tom the man, his namesake, once did. Often Mallory's instinct is to humor this impulse. She feels a mother must, or perhaps a mother should have, in the old world. Now, here, she always destroys what Tom's made and reminds him that the blindfold is the only protection any of them will ever need. Yet, Annette is blind.
Man, that was awesome.
It sure is. It's great.
That was like moving. I almost like kind of started crying. I gotta be honest with you, not to get all weird on you right away, but that was sweet, dude. That was great.
It reminds me. Obviously, this is taking place a little while after the events of Bird Box. Hopefully, no spoilers for anyone who's on. If you are one of the 6 people in America who hasn't either read the book or seen the film, then I apologize if we ruined anything for you. But in any event, it reminds me a little bit though of Halloween 2. where the action starts.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, almost from the first shots, the action, and you're like, it's 7 minutes after the last film ended. This is obviously much later, but still has kind of a feel of, you know, hitting the ground running. So I love that.
Well, I feel like in Bird Box, it's almost everything that happens after they arrive almost becomes like an afterthought, and even to me. So for them to arrive at the school and then open the book at the school does feel like no time has passed, even though it's been 2 years. Yeah.
Right.
That's cool. I'm going to read, this is awesome, A Little Sorrow. And it's A Little Sorrow, so this is sort of like a hidden complete short story within Full Throttle, right?
Right. So Full Throttle is advertised as a book of 13 short stories. It's actually 14. And because I grew up, you know, listening to like 80s metal and stuff, and there was always like a hidden track, you know, to make you feel like you had discovered something. There is this tiny little story hidden in there somewhere.
Tiny in size alone. I wish that Vincent Price was alive to give us like a master class on how to talk like a scary person, but I'll give it. A Little Sorrow. A man named Atkinson, as lonely as a castaway and as empty as a cupboard, found his way to a dank curio shop at the end of a nameless alley. He asked the shopkeep if he had something for the pain. The shopkeep put his hand on a sickly child with dark rings under his colorless eyes. I can sell you a small, persistent sorrow, guaranteed for life. Very little upkeep and utterly faithful. Just one of the faint odor of mothballs, otherwise. They soon agreed on a price, and Atkinson sank to one knee so the little sorrow could climb on his back, where it would remain for the rest of his natural life. The small child whispered that Atkinson was no good. His life had been for nothing. His mother had felt disgust for him from the first moment, Atkinson fastened onto her breast. The child told him this with great solemnity and quiet conviction. Atkinson staggered as he rose to his feet, felt a pinch in the small of his back, the weight already making him ache with fatigue. He inhaled deeply. A dizzying reek of mothballs and let out a great sigh of effort and relief. Company at last, he said, and he carried the whispering child out with him, feeling much lighter than when he had come in. All right, so that is...
Hey, thank you, man.
Phenomenal, dude. And I wanted to ask you about this right away. Because this is obviously the monster, right? Is abstract in a sense, right? Where sorrow is the monster, sadness, existence, life, depression, you know, all of this little freaking page, okay? So do you find yourself like actually seeking out like an original monster in that way? Or do you sometimes worry that if you reach too far for something like originality, that you may be losing some sense of relatability at the same time?
Well, I mean, I do think that, you know, especially in horror novels tend to only be about as good as their antagonists. You know, that you really do need that menace, that, you know, to be the, you know, 12-cylinder engine under the hood to drive things. But I don't know that I don't know that I think, you know, what am I going to do to make this? I know that when I wrote Nosferatu, that I wanted to do a vampire story that would avoid like every vampire story cliche possible, you know, so no fear of garlic, no shrinking away from raised crosses. You know, I was trying to think, what is the essence of the vampire? And what I came up with is they drain life away until all that is left is, you know, they drain all, they attack someone until their humanity is gone and they're left monsters like the person who attacked them. You know, and so that was kind of what I focused in on Nosferatu. I did think to myself when I was working on the book, you know, that I wanted Charlie Manx to have a cool weapon, you know, because I was like, Freddy Krueger had the fingers and stuff, and like, sure. You know, Texas, you know, the, you know, Leatherface has the chainsaw and stuff, and I'm like, I feel like, you know, I really got to find something here that's fresh, that no one has done before. And I came across this weapon called the autopsy mallet. So when you're cracking open a skull, there's this frightening looking silver hammer with a hook on one end that you use to bust into a human skull. And so I wound up giving Charlie an autopsy mallet. I'm like, boom, there's one we've never had before. I win horror this year. There's just there's one little thing. There's just one tiny little thing. I only ever looked at pictures of the autopsy mallet on the internet. It turns out in real life, an autopsy mallet's about that big. They're maybe this big. So it would be the ideal weapon for like a mouse serial killer to use, but not, but I just, maybe they have some bigger ones laying around. Charlie has a big head, so maybe they needed a bigger one for his skull.
There's something kind of creepy about a small weapon too. Man, I've gone on like Home Depot's like website searching like garden tools. I'm like, dude, I'm like, no, I can't use another shovel or a chainsaw, and I've gone through their like gardening, like what hasn't been used? No, this whole section's been used. Maybe we can go to like.
When you're a horror writer, your search history doesn't look good. Like if you were under investigation and they did electronic forensics on your computer, they'd be like going through the search history and it would be like, chemicals for knocking out another human, how to dispose of a body, affordable weapons, and it's like, you need to know this stuff for research, but I admit it doesn't look good. So I had a question for you.
Okay.
To me, Bird Box is a great scenario, but becomes unforgettable because it's anchored around some vivid, real, authentic feeling. There's an unforced authenticity to those characters, and they really spring off the page. The kids and Mal, feel to me very real. So what's your entry point? Is it the concept or is it the characters? What's the fuel for the story? What do you run on? What do you run on? Concept or character?
So it's like, okay, like I get it. I get that characters gotta be what we hang our hat on ultimately, and I get that that's what we're going to be experiencing the story through their journey, and we're going to empathize with them and all that. But I am, and when I read like reviews of books, oftentimes it's about that relatability with this character or this kind of thing, and I get it. But in my case, I am equally attracted to the conceit, the scenario, the idea. And I almost I find myself, and I don't know if this is because I'm an author, or like an artist, and is that I find myself not only relating to the characters, but like a step past that to the author, saying to myself, okay, this is a good idea. And that tells me something about him or her. And I find myself in the middle of experiencing these characters, and I'm really giving it my all to them, but I almost feel like it's written on like a pane of glass, every book I read, and I can see the author behind it.
Yeah, wow, what a great metaphor.
It's almost like nonfiction in a sense, because I'm thinking the whole time that this guy or girl thought of this, and that's nonfiction. This happened. They came up, they created what I'm reading, right? And so, if the last 100 books I read, I'm not on Goodreads really, but if I was, I'd give like 5 stars to 97 of them. I just, every book I read, I'm like, I'm able to find the impetus, the kernel that like inspired them, the reason they wrote the book.
Yeah.
So sometimes like maybe this character's a little flat or the writing's not so good, but I get like excited by the fact that they found the idea, or they found the idea exciting enough to write an entire novel. That idea in and of itself like thrills me. And so anytime I have a friend who brings up a novel idea and he's like, I don't know, just start, just go. I'm very, it just thrills me to locate that impetus. And then, okay, so with horror though, because we all know, especially like on TV or a book, we know beforehand that we're entering a scary story, right? It's either a image, or you read the back of the book, or someone told you, whatever it is, you know if you're entering a scary story. And that, to me, means that us as horror authors, the horror itself is almost a character. And if you can keep that character off stage for as long as you want, because the reader or viewer knows that at some point something scary is going to happen. So do you start right away with it? Sure, great. But you can wait as long. You can hold that character off stage as long as you want. It's like, to me, every horror story is scary until proven innocent, right?
Mm.
And then once
in Bird Box, you literally never see.
Right. In that one,
I literally never see what it is.
Right. That was complete laziness. Never got around to describing. So, okay. So that too is like, I try in my desk in my office not to get like too like boom, like metaphysical.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, dude, wait, hold on. This is all really talking about an author behind glass and horror off stage. Let's write a great story. But I would be lying if I said that those things didn't thrill me equally as much as the journey of any character I've ever read. And then one last thing to say about this. Take like the Twilight Zone, right? Rod Serling had like 22 minutes. I don't think that you or I ever walk away from an episode of the Twilight Zone saying, oh, I'm gutted. Oh, I'm emotionally just completely like gutted, or I ruined.
Right. It's all about the concept.
It's all about the concept. Like, and we'll say to each other, like, what about the one where this? What about the one where? Very rarely are we like, oh my God, that one made me cry. And The Twilight Zone maybe is the greatest TV show of all time. And I'm not arguing for scenario over character. But
I was just about to give you the counter argument. Okay.
Yeah,
so there is a counter argument. Okay. The counter argument is the X-Files. The X-Files had a lot of great concepts. You know, it lasted something like, 11 seasons, and 7 of them were really good. And you know, there were a lot of unique, ingenious, elevator pitches in the X-Files. But ultimately, that's not why we watched. The reason we watched is because we fell in love with those two. We fell in love with Mulder and Scully. And the mystery people wanted to have answered. There was one mystery they wanted the answer to. And it wasn't whether there were UFOs in Roswell. And it wasn't whether the smoking man had killed Kennedy. And it wasn't whether or not the black oil could turn you into a zombie. Okay? The only question people wanted answered was, will they or won't they? Are they going to hop in the sack together, or are they not? Because the chemistry between these two guys is so intense, it's peeling the paint off the walls.
And lasted like a decade.
For like a decade. And so ultimately, I can trace the moment all the air went out of the X-Files. I know exactly the moment the show really ended. A lot of people think, that it staggered on, 11 seasons or whatever, but all the energy dissipated the moment Duchovny and Gillian Anderson appeared on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine together in bed. They both had their clothes off. They were both in bed and, cuddled up to each other. And it was like, that's what people wanted to see. They finally got it. They're like, sweet.
And all that attention gone. Yeah, no, that's super cool. Yeah, I'm with you. Let me ask you a different question. But I love that subject, by the way. I could, stay on that for all day. When you sit down to write a story, like how important is it to you to know where you're going? How much do you need to know when you start writing a story?
Well, I think when you're writing a short story, you need to have the ending in sight from the beginning. I think that and that's how you know whether you're writing a short story or you're writing a novel. A short story is a question to which you already know the answer, and you think the answer will be surprising and fun. But from the beginning, you're working towards that last startling twist of the knife. So short stories are questions you know the answers to. Novels are questions you don't know the answer to, and you have to write hundreds of pages to figure it out. And this is a theory I firmly believed, having thought it up about 30 seconds ago.
Well, I was about to say that's really good advice, man, because I've had millions. I've had a million short stories where I'm like, shit, now what? Oh man, it was such a, see, that's one danger of being like, scenario first, is that like, you're like, oh shit, honey, it's so great that this idea, I'm just going to go You don't have that arc or anything, or what happens to Stanley. You don't have that. You're just thinking of just the construct, the setting, not the setting, the scenario. But then, so yeah. So does that mean with novels with you, are you a pantser entirely?
Yeah. And I mean, like, so I wrote a scene in The Fireman, and I write longhand, you know?
Oh, you do? Always?
Most of the time, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I have like the first draft of The Fireman, which was a 700-page novel, is like in 8 giant Luxterm 1917 notebooks, and I spent the entire month of August writing this 50-page sequence where my heroine Harper is trying to get a message to her companion John Rookwood, the fireman, and he's out on this island and she can't get to him. But she can get up. She is able to sneak up into the church tower with her bow and arrows, and she's trying to put a message to him, like in one of the arrows, and make this incredible 400-yard shot, to shoot an arrow over to the island. And she's hiding from the people who like don't want her. She's sort of a prisoner in this summer camp, and the people don't want her to leave. She's being held against her will. And I mean, I wrote the shit out of this for like a whole month. And the day after I finished the scene, I thought, couldn't she actually just pass a message along to their mutual friend, Allie? Yeah, she could.
Shit,
I guess I don't need any of that. And so, like literally, I spent the whole month writing this huge sequence that I threw out the next day. And that's the danger. That's the peril of pantsing. But to me, it's a very authentic, organic way to write because I'm anchoring the story in a set of characters, and I'm placing them in an intense situation, and I'm just seeing what they'll do. And I'm trying things out like a scientist, who's, trying several control experiments, and sometimes an experiment fails and you wind up, going back 100 pages or going back 50 pages and starting again. But more often than not, if you can get, if you can tune in the characters, if you can get a good read on the characters, they'll always do just exactly what they really do. And as long as you play fair and honest, the story will stay interesting.
Yeah, that's great. Outlines bore me, man. And if I write
I hate outlines
from beginning to end, I'm just lo-fi enough to say to myself, that book is done. It's a weird looking book, but it's done. Like that whole story is told in this weird bullet point, but okay, it's told now. Yeah, so I'm the same way, and that's gotten me into trouble as well. Not quite to the scenario. I'm sometimes pig-headed enough where in that scenario that you described, I would, rather than scratching that arrow sequence, I would go back and try to make it impossible for her to like what she could so easily
pass the message along.
Yeah.
So also I was aware I was writing a long book, and so I'm really insecure. I'm really worried. Like we live in such distracted times, and I'm really worried that people will abandon my book and go watch Tiger King on Netflix. They might do something. I mean, they might do something terrible. Like watch Bird Box again on Netflix. And so the only way to keep them pinned to the book, is to not waste their time. And so even though I actually think that sequence, that 50-page sequence where she shoots the arrow from the church tower, I feel it was suspenseful and well written and did interesting things with the character, but ultimately it was a big fat book to begin with, and everything really has to carry its weight. One of my mentors, the TV writer Carlton Hughes, talks about how every scene has to serve a character purpose and a plot purpose. It can't just do one or the other; it has to do both. And I kind of think that's true. And I also think that you want to look for the path of least resistance. That you want to find, that your characters have to be smart enough most of the time, to find what appears to be the most frictionless way to get what they want. Once they start, it's not always as easy as they thought it was going to be. But
when we met in Chicago and we were on that panel, you brought up that whole like get rid of the interstitial stuff, and it really stuck with me. And even the word, I was like, man. I was like, I've been writing books for like 20 years now. No one's ever told me to get rid of the freaking interstitial stuff before,
you can jump. There's this amazing moment in the first season of Fargo, where there's a shootout in like episode 7, and the guy is driving away from it. And everything we've seen has taken place in a few weeks. And then our hero is driving away from it. And as he's driving, there's this kind of blur effect, and suddenly he's wearing a postman's uniform. And the credit below says 15 months later. And you're like, what? We just jumped 15 months in the middle of the episode? You know, we could do that?
Right.
But it was 15 months before anything interesting happened again.
Yeah. I was talking to John, you know John Langan? You read The Fisherman?
Yeah. Yeah, I know John Langan.
Yeah, that book. Woo. And I was talking to him after I read it. I called him and we were talking about whatever. Just I felt like his book was like jam-packed with ideas and I know that there's a lot in that book about grieving and that whole thing, especially at the head of it. But I felt that he was almost like forced to better himself or out imagine himself in every sequence that followed each other.
Yeah.
And I was telling him that sometimes when I start a book, I have like 3 landmark moments, 3 great scares that I'm thinking, oh, I'm gonna need to. It starts here, and I'm gonna need to. Who the hell knows how get to this one, and then who the fuck knows how get to this one, and then it struck me. Wait, when I was reading John's book, like put all 3 scares in the front and come up with 40 more, man. And that goes in line with your get rid of the interstitial stuff. And right now I'm writing a book right now with those thoughts in mind, and I can feel that engine behind it from talking to the two of you about that stuff.
Well, I've also worked on, so it's been a while since Nosferatu, since The Fireman. And I worked a little bit on one book, and I was like, I like it, but I don't know if I love it. And I worked a little on another book, and I'm like, this got some really good scenes in it, but I don't know if I love it. So I had a couple things I was working on. Now I'm working on a book. It's going great. But one of the things I'm doing with it is, like, all the stuff I really loved in these earlier projects that didn't quite come together, I'm just pouring them right into the novel, you know, and you know, nothing is going to waste or anything. And I was talking to Carlton Cuse about it, and I said, you know, I feel a little bad because I'm definitely, you know, like these earlier projects, like by cannibalizing the best bits, I'm never coming back to them. And Carlton Cuse is like, you can't save anything.
Yeah.
You know, you can't set anything aside. You've just got to use your whole clip. You've got to empty the entire magazine.
Dude,
you know,
yes.
You can worry about getting more bullets later.
What I'm about to tell you is almost embarrassing in hindsight. I had an idea for what would be book 3 of Bird Box. I'm not even like a series guy. I don't even know why I'm thinking this way. I mean, maybe I do, but I had an idea for book 3 that I thought was really great. And I had no idea for book 2. And I'm talking to my manager at length, like, what could it be? Blah, blah, blah. And finally we're like, wait, what? Why isn't book 3 book 2?
Right, exactly.
What are you talking about?
Right.
And that's the exact same thing. You have these 2 landmark ideas and then just this big opens. Okay, well, let's put those ideas next to each other. Yeah. And so it's almost embarrassing in hindsight. Okay, cool.
I have a couple more questions for you. Do we, you know, John, how are we doing? Do we need to should we be taking questions from the audience or should we keep, because we can keep blabbing. It's, you know, I got a couple other things I'm wondering about. I've been wondering a little bit about the soggy green guy on the speaker behind you.
Yes, I'm going to bring him closer. This is from Creepshow. You especially, but you and I are both in a Creepshow family. I'm going to get them both. Hold on a second.
Quick, everybody! We can study the books on his shelf.
It's almost unfair not to have them both.
Oh God!
Yeah, something to tide you over. I got these recently from some dude online. He just had like a regular rack of masks, and these 2 were next to each other, like still together in the middle of this rack. You know?
Oh, those guys are great. They're really well done.
No, they're really well done, right?
Yeah. Savini would love them.
Yeah. Okay.
So my funny random story about Creepshow, I've talked about it a few times, and I talk about it in the introduction of Full Throttle. But you know, I was like a child actor on the original movie. I was the kid Billy with the voodoo doll, right? You know, and I spent the whole week hanging out in Tom Savini's trailer. They didn't have an on-set babysitter or anything, so they made Tom Savini be my babysitter. So I spent the whole week in his trailer, you know, watching him hack up movie stars and fashion these great, you know, unforgettable movie monsters. When I left, he gave me a bunch of things to keep. And one of the things he gave me was one of the foam claws for The Beast Under the Stairs and the story The Crate.
Oh yeah.
And if I still had that thing in mint condition, you know, that might be worth a lot of money, man.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I'll tell you, it was
I
like
would give you a lot of money for that thing.
but so I was only like 10 and completely clueless, and it was the 1980s, and no one had any notion like any of this stuff would be valuable at any point at all. And so, so I used to play fetch with it with my dog, and he chewed it to pieces. He chewed giant chunks out of the foam and stuff. This was the family Welsh Corgi, Marlowe. And I'd toss it, and he'd go get it, come back with this severed claw in his hand. But eventually, you know, he tore giant chunks out of it, and the thing just, you know, completely came apart. So that's what happened to this legendary, film artifact.
Man, I just ordered something on eBay. I'm like a Creepshow collector, man. That movie is one of the first horror movies I ever saw.
I wonder what happened to the voodoo doll.
What'd you say?
I wonder what happened to the voodoo doll.
I don't know.
I bet the voodoo doll would be worth some bank.
It's probably Greg Nicotero has it. Yeah, I tried to. He like has a whole freaking warehouse, man. And I tried to buy, you know, the dollhouse from my episode. I tried to buy it, and he had already got it. Like, you know, I was like, oh, come on. I have this big open space in my office, and you know, it's perfect. They go right here, and it's going in the warehouse.
I don't want to have a promotional fail here. Folks should know that Josh had a story on the first season of Creepshow, which is an anthology series based on the original film. It aired on Shudder, which is a terrific streaming service. It's super cheap. It's like $5 a month, and it's just packed with horror TV and classics of horror cinema, some great horror documentaries. It's really focused on suspense and horror. But so Creepshow is making the leap to AMC. AMC is actually going to air the first season, and then they're going to air the second season, as it comes out as well. So I highly recommend checking it out. The whole thing was masterminded by Greg Nicotero, who is the gross-out master of makeup special effects behind The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead. Guy is wonderful. He is the true heir to George A. Romero and Tom Savini. Just a wonderful guy. And he has like this workshop of horror wonders. And one of the things, I think it's okay to talk about this.
Wait, have you been there?
I have not been there, but
okay.
I know that he's rebuilding Bruce from Jaws. That he's got one of the original shark animatronics from Jaws, that he tracked it down. There was an NPR piece about tracking one of them down. And he has bought and is restoring Bruce the shark from the first Jaws, and eventually it's going to be on display in all its working, operating glory in a film museum in LA. Actually, if the thing is fully operable and fully working, then it'd be an improvement on the shark in the movie, which never worked, and that's why they kept it off camera, proving your theory that it's actually scarier not to see.
Oh yeah, Jaws is Silence of the Lambs too. Both of those, right?
Yeah, totally.
John,
we have questions. We do have some questions.
Okay, have you been looking at the chat and stuff?
Yes. I'm trying to keep up furiously with the chat, and it's
busy.
It's busy. It's lots of great stuff. We have like 60 questions in addition to the that's not including this pre-submitted question. So I'm happy to like throw. I think what I can do is I can throw a question onto answer live, and you might be able to see it. So I might just try to grab one from random.
Let's go for it.
Start. Here's one.
Hey, I just want to say thanks too to everyone who's been hanging out with us. I don't know if this is boring or fun or what, but it's great that you hopped onto Zoom to spend some time with us this evening. Really cool.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being so nice and respectful in the chat. It's very heartening to see. So let me actually just, because I'm desperate here, grab a question from the pre-submitted ones for both of you guys. And it's also one that's coming up in the chat a lot and in various ways in the Q&A, which is how has the current circumstances affected the storylines of anything you're currently working on? And then there's also a lot of questions about horror trends in the wake of pandemic fiction becoming reality. So just sort of responding to the current climate, both maybe in your personal writing projects and maybe as well responding to it as you think that the genre might, or the horror suspense landscape might respond.
Well, we both of us professionally have touched on some of the themes we're all living through right now. I mean, Bird Box is sort of the original Shelter in Place novel. You know, I feel like, although I do want to, you know, and I wrote about a pandemic and the firemen, and then a similar sort of unfolding global catastrophe in a story called Rain, which is in my book of novellas, Strange Weather. I want to say two things. The first of all, coronavirus is not in any way like the events of Bird Box, The Stand, the Firemen, or it's terrible. It's tragic. It's stressful. It's put us all under a lot of stress, but we are going to get through it. It's not, you know, it is not, this is not the apocalypse. You know, it's a terrible virus, but we're going to beat it. We're gonna survive it. We're gonna have a vaccine for it in 18 months. You know, we've got all these heroic people working on the front lines, you know, in the hospitals. You know, doing amazing things to keep the truly sick alive and save lives. So, I mean, I guess I want to say, and I'll shut up in a second, but I guess I want to say it's going to be all right. I mean, it's tragic and scary, but it is going to be all right, which is, you know, not really the message of most horror novels. Most horror novels are actually, no, it's not going to be all right. No matter what you think, however bad you think it's going to be, it's about to get worse.
I think I needed to hear, I mean, I know I needed to hear what you just said. I find myself, I'm reading stuff like this right now. And I've been on a strict horror diet for like 20 years, man. It's been terrible for my skin. And I'm on this like fantasy kick for the first, and by the way, Terry Brooks is awesome. And I've been on this kick for really, I noticed the duration of this lockdown, and it struck me like, oh, I'm looking for something with a little less bite right now.
Yeah.
And I typically don't. And I even when realizing that, I was like, no, I'm gonna read this whole series, this whole fantasy series. I had already, I've been putting out a serialized novel that I'm writing while on lockdown. It's not done. Just write a chapter, check it, post it. But I had already had the idea for that prior to all this happening. So I don't know yet how, in answer to that question, I don't know yet how this is going to affect writing, my own writing, or really the genre in general. I have this sense that most people will probably stay away from, I don't know why, but I have a sense that most people will stay away from pandemic stories after this. I know that Paul Tremblay has one coming out in July as well, and we're all crazy excited to read that. And I can't imagine that his book is going to do
Survivor
anything.
Song. Order it from Literati Books, and they'll pre-order from Literati Books. They'll hook you up. Survivor Song. Paul Tremblay, one of the best young horror writers in the biz. And
it's like, I just, maybe I'm just a super optimist or something, but I don't see his book being affected either way. I think everyone, we're all excited to read his book either way and that kind of thing. But going forward, beyond this moment, I don't know. I don't know about you. But see, you did the Fireman, and I've played with Bird Box and Gallery. I'm not sure that I would have anyway. But if I had to guess, my instinct tells me that the genre will sort of actually kind of stay away from it. Not
because it's too close.
It's too close, and it's like, gosh, lockdown. I mean, it's like a slow grueling. You know, it's not even like a singular traumatic event. It's like a slow building traumatic event. It's like, all right, when this is over, I think the last thing I'm going to write about is a pandemic.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, and the thing is like, you know, this is not the zombie apocalypse. You know, the dead. I mean, you know, for at least some people, you know, the great fear has been running out of toilet paper. You know, and I've been worried. I mean, if I run out of toilet paper, I don't know. I guess if the library's open, maybe I could go and get The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump and bring it home, and then just, you know, when I need a fresh one. So no, I went out to the supermarket and I got everything on the shopping list, and I came back and almost everything. And my oldest boy said, "Oh, you weren't able to get me pita bread?" And I'm like, You're bummed. I was counting on using that as toilet paper when we ran out.
That's a great image, man.
Yeah, I bet.
So there's a lot of questions too about influences, and I'm sorry if you've maybe touched on this while I'm trying to get up to speed on everyone's chats and things, but maybe leave this open-ended. Books, and I can furiously try to catch up to them and drop links in the chat, but books or really other media that were maybe sort of primary to you guys as you became authors.
Well, I mean, all of these, you know what I mean? Every single thing we read, influence. But in the earliest of days for me, it was anthology horror movies. The first few horror movies I saw were anthology movies. Twilight Zone, the movie, Creepshow, and a third. I just can't remember the name of it right now. Terror Train? Is that the name of the one? It's like literally on the train. Okay. Anyway, so my initial introduction to the genre was a bunch of different ideas in one 2 hour period, and it was almost like you could almost take Twilight Zone the movie and it has every variety you wanted. There's the social statement with the first one. There's the more heartstring but still like far out, how did this happen with Spielberg's. There's the balls of the wall imagination with Joe Dante, and then there's like the straight monster on the airplane horror story. And for that to be like the initial like education, then to see Creepshow shortly after that, where it was horror but like almost cartoonishly exaggerated, that to this day those two must be like the most like influential on me. But the thing that I'm sort of most influenced by is what's it called, like prolifics, like artists that steadily have put out a movie for their whole career, 2 books a year, like all the 80s guys and girls, 2 books a year, like for every year, this kind of thing. Do you know Guided by Voices, the band?
Yeah,
like that guy. They've got like 100 albums, and I've always been really impressed with that. And
look at Dylan.
Oh, for sure. Puts out one of his best songs ever, like a week ago, right? So I think that part of the reason that influenced me so heavy, being prolific, is that if you have a body of work rather than like a single book you wrote, right, it sort of disperses the spotlight. And suddenly everything you're writing is adding to this like canon, this quilt, this multicolored, Joe is not just one book. Or, Margaret Mitchell, she died younger, but she had one book that we all know. That's one of the greatest books ever. But the point is, I've always been attracted to the artists that Stephen King, your dad, Woody Allen was like that. I know he's crazy, hard one to swallow right now, but for years he was that to me. Anybody that was operating 1 a year, 2 books a year, that kind of thing, when I was first getting into like writing, was like super influential to me.
I mean, for me, I guess the big influences would be like, okay, so the movies I saw between about 1982 and 1987, like John Carpenter, Steven Spielberg, James Cameron, like so much of my ideas about story were shaped by films like, Aliens, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Escape from New York. I mean, like that's like my whole creative DNA. But I do, there are certain writers that I obsess over because I'm sort of, I'm sort of a vulture for technique, and so I'm always sort of like, so like when I want to think about, dialogue, when I'm thinking of, I look at Elmore Leonard. When I just want sturdy, I want to remember what it's like, to just experience sturdy, clear prose. I read Larry McMurtry. I've learned a lot about pacing and humor from Brian K. Vaughan, who's done the comics like Saga and Why the Last Man. It shifts. There's no lack of great creators out there doing work to be inspired by.
Yeah, no joke. And my friends, I mean, it's to the point now where it's like every sponge level, like anything. Yeah. my friend James, he sends me like he just sent me two acts of the two first acts of the scripts he's working on today. That's good. When I read it tonight, that's going to influence me tomorrow. You know, we've reached some sort of influence homeostasis.
So I think a lot of folks are asking questions about advice for young writers or advice for people getting into horror writing and things like that. And I wonder if we can also sculpt that question around the time some people might find on their hands these days, but also on the one hand, we have time, but it's also hard to do things with that time. I feel like a lot of people I've talked to have mentioned how they feel like they do 20% of what they normally do since all of our routines are shifted and changed. So I think maybe it might be advantageous to address questions about, I think we can do this and then maybe one more question, but address questions about jumping into writing, advice for young writers, but contextualize it with like, people might be able to only do it in small snatches these days, or how to approach it when routines are really kind of disordered right now.
I mean, if you haven't left the house in 10 days and you've got 3 little kids, you know, screaming and fighting under the table, and there's nothing left in the fridge except fist sticks, and every time you look at Twitter or Facebook, the news is bad, give yourself a fucking break. You know, I mean, like it's hard to be relaxed in the relaxed, playful mind state you need to do fun, creative work. You know, and I mean, in terms of writing, in terms of like, you know, advice for first-time writers, you know, my go-to is, you know, stop thinking about writing a novel. Don't sit down to write a short story. You know, just sit down to write a good scene. Just one good scene. You know, that's a short story is just a couple good scenes, and a novel is a stack of good scenes. You know, and by good scene I mean something you know, you've got a character who is immediately struggling with something interesting. You know, Josh has heard me say this before because we did an event. You know, I'm practically repeating myself, but you know, like it's amazing how many stories begin with a guy waking up and brushing his teeth and checking himself out in the mirror and, you know, getting dressed and thinking about the job and, you know, opening the fridge and making breakfast. And we don't need that scene because nothing's happened. The only reason to show that scene is if when he opens the fridge, there's a severed head inside. Then you got something, you know, but otherwise I like to get characters talking. You know, I always think like, you know, if you've got a moment to write, try to get a couple characters talking and don't have them agree with each other. You know, disagreement is interesting. 2 people who are on the same page, like why even report that conversation? So, you know, and dialogue is fun to write and it kind of pops and it's like, it has forward motion. It's going somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
So that would be my limited advice.
A thing that helps me, and this sometimes sounds cold, but it's not for me, is numbers. Like if you know, I heard somewhere along the line that Hemingway wrote like 300 words a day or something, you know, something just unfathomably small to me to think of like 300, that's like a page or whatever. But that stuff adds up.
It stacks up.
So if you can't, like, Alice and I are always talking, time's going to pass either way. If you did a little bit each day, when those 3 months are up, oh my gosh, we have a stack of 100 and, you know, beyond pages. So the obvious adage Rome wasn't built in a day, but that really, really applies to a novel.
You only need to write 1 page a day to be a book. You only need to write 1 page a day to be a book a year writer. That would be 365. That'd be 365 pages a year. That's a book.
And that would be considered prolific. Like wildly prolific. A book a year, and that's writing 1 page a day. All right, well, even if it's a half a page, then in 2 years. But either way, if you do find it in those little snatches, you find those moments of time to pull that off, you will be propelled by watching that stack grow. But
here's the problem: you got to rewrite it. So after you've done 365 pages in a year, you still got to rewrite the thing.
Yeah, that is the problem.
And in the course of rewriting it, you discover out of those 365 pages that actually only 70 of them are any good.
Yeah, right. So this is more like the
it doesn't quite work. The math doesn't quite work, but you get what we're saying.
Yeah, that goes a long way with me. And then for for advice for like straight up beginners, the one that worked for me was the day that I completely rid myself of the words good or bad. Is this good or bad? Is this bad. The minute it was like, it doesn't matter, I can fix all this later. And the second that philosophy actually took root, the doors just flew open. And it was like, oh wait, this doesn't, I can fix this later. What would you rather have? 300 pages you can fix or none at all, right? So those two go a really long way with me.
I mean, a novel can take months to write. It can take years to write. It's not worth getting hung up about. I mean, your bad days don't really matter that much.
Right.
And your good days don't really matter that much either. It all
Right.
disappears in the wash, you know? I mean, go ahead, John. You got one more question for us?
I'm searching for one. I'm also just so enthralled by what you guys talk about, and everyone in the chat is like talking about how they could listen to you talk all day.
Okay, well, while you're looking, I got a quick question for Josh.
Great.
We'll do a few quick ones. Okay, so favorite horror novel?
Man, favorite horror novel, man.
Best horror movie soundtrack?
Creepshow. I'm not even kidding. That's like my, and Under the Skin. Those two are like my, like, woo, you know, those two. Best horror novel.
I gotta go with, listen, it's not a horror movie, but I gotta go with Moon, which is a film by Duncan Jones, a science fiction flick. That's got, who did the soundtrack? I'm blanking on his name. He's great. It's not Hans Zimmer. No. Someone in the chat, tell me. Clint Mansell, thank you. It was Clint Mansell. Yes, thank you. I was saved by the chat. Jess, you're the best. Thank you.
I've got a question here.
Sure.
It's one I'm curious about too. You both have like so many ideas generating for next projects all the time. How do you, and this maybe dovetails with writing advice too, how do you choose what's next, and how do you focus on it and keep it from, spiraling off other sub ideas and sort of stay on track with the next project? How do you pick the next project?
For me, it becomes this almost like disciplinarian, militant, you must finish this one first, the next one. And the problem with that is, with any work that is longer, one of the hard things is maintaining the enthusiasm for it. And meanwhile, you have this shimmering brand new idea over here, and you're like, well, I could just go finish that one real fast, but then this one may never get done. So that would be a spot where more than anything, where discipline to me like comes in. You must finish. I've even like made lists, and then I got to like follow the list, even if I don't feel like that one next, but you got to do this one next, because I do think it's like important to finish one, because then when you go to the next one, you have the momentum of having just finished the story. So that's my take on that. What about you, man?
I mean, I got a comic book line, Hill House Comics, that we're doing through DC. And I do comics, Lock and Key, and Dying is Easy with IDW. When the artists need pages, we've got deadlines, I mean, there's got to be another issue, out for next month, and then an issue for the month after that. And so it's kind of on rails. You can't really, I've got to produce. I mean, if, otherwise there's some artist who's depending on me sitting around twiddling his thumbs and, trying to figure out what he's going to do to, buy beer and chips. So the comic books have sort of taught me to stay on the rails, to continue with the project I've got going. And I've got the threat. I've got this exterior threat, which is an artist is drawing and he's catching up to me. If I'm not writing, he's catching up to me. So that keeps me moving. And you say you're going to do a short story for an anthology or something, and then you've got to finish a short story for the anthology because you've got a deadline. So that kind of keeps me on track a little.
That's something that, like, through the years, I started to, me and the other songwriter in the High Strung, Mark Owen, him and I started to give ourselves what we called phantom deadlines. Like, no one else says you got to finish this book, but you're saying I got to finish it by May, or this
right.
Whatever, and actually really stick to that. That helps too, in terms of like, you aren't, this thing isn't kind of been, maybe I'm doing it, maybe I'm not, sludging around for a few years or something.
I've also learned there's no escape from it being difficult. There's the best idea you have is always the one you're not writing, because you believe it will be easier. But I've spent enough time being me to learn that I'll always make it difficult for myself. It doesn't matter what the idea is. No, it doesn't matter how good it looks. Sooner or later, I'll be writing, it'll be going great, and then I'll come up with some nonsense that will make me feel miserable for 3 weeks. So I might as well just keep writing what I'm writing, because where the grass really is not greener. It's the same old grass.
Same color, man.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, and this is one that I have verified has been asked across all mediums of asking, which is,
Which one of us is wearing pants?
uh, no, although people have mentioned in the chat about pants. It's when are you guys going to collaborate, and are you going to collaborate?
Oh my God, that'd be really
Josh
cool.
got a comic for Hill House.
Oh, done. Okay. Okay.
All right, cool.
We're starting right now. Dude, I would love to do that. Yes.
I think that'd be terrific. Love to have you do a comic for Hill House. You know, basically, my deal about the Hill House comics is like some of the happiest hours of my life were when I was a kid, and I'd go to like a mom and pop video store. You know, this is pre-internet, pre-streaming. If you wanted something, you had to rent it at the videotape store. And I'd go to the mom and pop section, and I'd go into their nasty old horror section, and I'd hunt around for a horror film I hadn't seen. And in those days, it was all this straight-to-video schlock, and all of it sucked. All of it was terrible, you know, just badly made, badly acted, badly written, except sometimes once, you know, every 3 or 4 months, you would find something like Reanimator that would be so fucking great.
Yeah.
Your brain would squirt out your ears.
Yeah.
And so my goal for Hill House has always been for those titles, those horror comics, to be like one of those straight-to-video horror movie VHS 1980s era classics, like Reanimator comes to mind. Witchboard was a good one.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
I
I just watched a weird one called Mortuary. You ever seen Mortuary? That's a weird one. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if that's
that one. I gotta get back. I gotta throw Shudder
Keep
on.
missing it.
You know, there's a lot of good stuff on Shudder.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I
This
think
was awesome.
we've really just breezed through an hour.
Yeah,
it's
I don't.
crazy.
I was really nervous. I just I'm nervous for freaking everything. But yeah, wow, that was a fast hour from this end.
This was a really good time. Now, if we sign out, can I stay on the chat for a little bit? Because I'd answer people's questions for a couple seconds.
We can just keep going, I think, for a little bit. I think we can formally end it, and then
Guys, it's over, but it's not, because I'm going to jump into the chat and just look at a few questions and see if I can answer stuff. So I'm still here. I'm still here for a minute. Josh, if you want to hang out, you can.
Yeah.
Because this is.
yeah,
Someone
I think we'll let folks jump off if they want to jump off, and sort of formally end things, and just kind of do like a virtual signing line or something like that for now. And but just
listen,
really
guys.
quickly,
go ahead.
I'll just mention that. Thanks to everyone who participated. Thank you all for your really wonderful questions and for all the great things you said in the chat. And if you want to order Josh or Joe's books on our store, you can do it at literatibookstore.com. A lot of you asked about shipping internationally, which is crazy. There are people here from South Africa, from Canada, from England, from Colombia. It's incredible, and we're so happy to bring you all together. We can't ship internationally right now. You can donate to keep what Literati Bookstore does going by going to our webpage. There's a donate button. We want to host more events like this. But thank you for being here. Thank you for participating.
Yeah, guys, please pick up a couple
and
books. Pick up a couple books and help support a great indie bookstore.
Yeah, and we've done a couple of theatrical readings at Literati, and it's phenomenal. Love that store, everyone. Just so you know, I mean, you can tell they do cool stuff, but in-house too, it's a good one. So help them out. Yep.